I signed that contract 15 years ago in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and overheated wires. Back then, our company, our dentist systems, was 4 people crammed into a subleased office above a check-cashing place. We didn't have matching chairs. The air conditioner screamed every time someone microwaved noodles, but I had something rare ideas that actually worked. My name is Daisy Knox. I wasn't loud. I wasn't ambitious in the way executives like to recognize. I didn't chase titles or stock photos on the company website. I built things, systems, processes, technology that made money quietly, reliably, without applause. The first prototype nearly electrocuted me. The second worked. That ugly metal box became patent 1. Then came 2. Then 5. By year 6, there were 12. By year 10, more than 20. Each one filed under the company's name with my name listed as the original inventor. A detail no one cared about. Not yet. The licensing deals grew. Manufacturing firms, defense contractors, overseas partners who flew in just to watch my demos. Our dentist expanded into a glass and steel tower downtown, espresso machines that cost more than my first car, HR manuals thicker than phone books. Through it all, I stayed in the lab, head down, focused. By the time Patent 35 came through an adaptive production system that let factories switch lines without shutdown, we were securing 9-figure contracts. Analysts called it revolutionary. I called it another Tuesday. I should have noticed the shift earlier. New branding, new slogans, new executives who spoke fluent buzzword and broken logic. Meetings started appearing without my name. Budgets were temporarily reallocated. Engineers I trained vanished from my lab overnight. Then Evan Calder, the new CEO, arrived. His shoes shined like a funeral casket. He shook hands like we were equals. Like 15 years of sweat and sleepless nights could be reset with a smile. He talked about fresh energy and modernizing innovation. I listened. I documented everything. Because when people stop inviting you to meetings, they usually think you're already gone. I just didn't expect him to want an audience. By the second month under Evan Calder, my name stopped appearing on anything that mattered. At first, it was subtle. Strategy meetings moved to calendar slots I couldn't attend. Product reviews happened behind glass walls, with the blinds half drawn. When I asked, I got polite replies. Not essential this time. Daisy, we'll loop you in later. Later never came. Then my lab budget was cut in half. No explanation, no conversation, just a revised spreadsheet circulated by finance. With my funding neatly redirected to something called Brand Acceleration Initiatives, I stared at the numbers longer than I should have, waiting for them to make sense. They didn't. I went to my department head, technically still my manager. Though the org chart had quietly reclassified me as a senior innovation advisor, she couldn't meet my eyes. Said the change came from Evan. Said it was temporary. Said she was sorry. Sorry doesn't keep prototypes alive. Patent 36 was already in late-stage testing. Without that budget, the trials would stall. Without the trials, the filing would miss its window. I asked if Evan understood that. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, like it might answer for her. A week later, 2 engineers from my team were reassigned. No warning, no transition. I walked into the lab and found their desks cleared. Names erased from the board as if they'd never existed. Someone had even unplugged their test rigs. That was when I stopped assuming incompetence. I started documenting everything. Every skipped meeting, every budget cut, every asset transfer that didn't require my approval anymore. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was alert. The way you get when the air goes still before a storm. The quarterly review confirmed it. I'd submitted a full technical report on Patent 35. Evan didn't use a single slide. Instead, he stood at the front of the room, clicking through a glossy deck full of stock photos and empty phrases. Next phase optimization. My system. His name on the title slide. I sat in the back. Jaw tight. Coffee untouched. The board nodded along. Pleased. They didn't care who built the engine, only that the numbers kept moving. After the meeting, one of my former engineers slipped a note into my hand. This place doesn't deserve you. I folded it and put it in my wallet. By month 3, I was barely invited to my own demos. Evan pitched my work to investors like a man selling a house he didn't build and didn't understand. He laughed easily. He believed he was winning. That was the mistake. Because while Evan was busy erasing me in public, he never thought to check what I'd locked down in private. He assumed silence meant surrender. He assumed experience meant obsolescence. He assumed I was just another legacy problem he could clean up with a smile and a signature. He was wrong, and he was getting ready to make it official. Evan waited for the board meeting. Of course he did. He could have handled it quietly. An email, a closed-door conversation, HR present with rehearsed sympathy and a severance packet already printed. But Evan didn't want quiet. He wanted confirmation, an audience. He wanted to be seen cleaning house. The boardroom was staged like a performance-set polished walnut table. Bottled water aligned with surgical precision. Nameplates angled just enough to feel important. Nearly 500 employees watched the live stream from conference rooms and production floors across the building. Evan stood at the head of the table, relaxed, confident, enjoying the weight of attention. I took my seat without a word. Before the financials. Evan cleared his throat and smiled. Before we move forward, he said, there's a small legacy matter we need to resolve. That word again. Legacy. He reached under the table and pulled out a thin folder. My folder. The original contract I'd signed 15 years earlier, back when we didn't have legal counsel, and downloaded templates from the internet. I recognized the crease on the corner, the faded ink where my hand had slipped. This, Evan said, holding it up, is what sentimentality looks like in a modern company. Then he fed it into the shredder behind him. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, inch by inch. He watched me the entire time, pausing just enough to make sure everyone saw. Paper vanished into plastic teeth. The sound echoed in the room, amplified by silence. You've had a good run. Daisy, he continued, voice smooth. But innovation needs fresh thinking, new blood, not people coasting on yesterday's ideas. No HR, no warning, no transition. Just shredded paper and applause that never quite arrived. A few board members chuckled awkwardly. Most stared at the table. One man I'd once shared a 12-hour compliance call with looked up at me, then immediately away. I didn't react. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, noted. I said, that was it. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked out while the shredder hummed behind Evan like a machine congratulating itself. What none of them understood, what Evan especially didn't, was that the paper he destroyed was ceremonial. A fossil. The real contract hadn't lived in a drawer for years. The real contract lived elsewhere. Buried on page 12, subsection C, under intellectual property and breach protocols. A clause written quietly, filed carefully, protected obsessively. A clause that stated very clearly that if I were terminated in breach of contract, every patent I created reverted to me, fully, immediately. 35 patents. The engine, the foundation, the company. Evan thought he'd erased me. Instead, he'd handed me the keys. Observant viewers will notice something unusual here. What about you? The clause didn't come from paranoia. It came from necessity. Back in year 3, when our dentist landed its first real licensing deal, the partners' legal team asked a question no one inside the company had bothered to consider. Who actually owns the technology? Clean ownership. No gray areas, no future disputes. When we looked closely, the original contracts were generous, vague, dangerous. That's when I hired my own attorney. His name was Harold Levin, late 50s, always smelled faintly of mint and printer toner. He didn't smile much. He didn't waste words. We met every Thursday in the same diner, always the booth by the window. I'd bring schematics. He'd bring a legal pad and a pen he never let anyone borrow. Contracts aren't shields, he told me once, circling a paragraph in red. They're weapons. You just need to decide who's allowed to hold them, line by line. We rewrote my agreement, quietly, legally, no theatrics. The company signed it because they needed the deal to close. And no one thought a mid-level inventor was worth fighting over. Buried deep was the clause: intellectual property reversion in event of material breach. If the company terminated me without following the agreed process, all patents credited to me as original inventor would revert back to my ownership. Not some. All. Including derivative works, including active licenses. We didn't just sign it. We notarized it digitally, timestamped it, stored it across redundant servers and offline backups. Immutable, unalterable, invisible to anyone not looking for it, and no one ever looked. Over the years, new leadership came and went, new HR systems, new NDAs, updated employee handbooks full of click-to-agree screens. I never signed a single one. Legal noticed, legal asked questions, legal backed off. They knew better. Even during the acquisition that brought Evan Calder in, my contract remained untouched. Too old, too specific, too dangerous to poke, until Evan shredded it on camera. Public termination, no HR, no due process. Witnessed, recorded, textbook breach, that night. I called Harold. I told him exactly what happened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled once, long and slow. "Well," he said, "that was spectacularly stupid." By morning, he'd filed the breach notice, attached the original contract, the notarized clause, a complete list of all 35 patents, their registrations, and current licensing dependencies. We didn't send it to Evan. We sent it to our dentist legal. Then we copied their outside counsel. And then we waited. Because when lawyers stop replying, it's not confidence, it's panic. The response didn't come right away. At first, our dentist pretended nothing had happened. A press release went out 2 days later, polished, cheerful, soaked in corporate optimism. Leadership evolution, seamless continuity, bold next chapter. Not a word about patents. Not a whisper about breach. I read it while stirring creamer into my coffee, the kind with too much vanilla and not enough honesty. Harold called an hour later. "They're stalling," he said. "Buying time, hoping you blink." I didn't, inside the company. The cracks started small, almost invisible. One production line in Ohio halted for routine recalibration, 6 hours offline, no public explanation, at $24,000 an hour. Someone definitely noticed. The cause wasn't mechanical, it was authorization. One of the adaptive control modules mine required a certification key tied to the original patent holder, a detail no one had ever bothered to rotate when engineering tried to bypass it. The system locked itself down under safety protocol. Compliance overrode convenience, exactly as designed. Then Germany called. Our dentist's largest overseas manufacturing partner flagged a clause in their licensing agreement. Continued use of technology derived from Patent 26 required ongoing certification from the original inventor. That certification, by contract, came from me. Their email landed in my inbox. Not legal's, not Evan's. Mine. I didn't answer. By the end of the week, internal panic had found a pulse. Engineers I'd mentored for years messaged me late at night. "Is it true? Did he really fire you like that?" They say everything's fine, but systems are locking up. Legal finally responded to our notice. Carefully worded, passive voice. They disputed the interpretation, claimed the termination followed internal policy. They never mentioned the shredded contract, never addressed the public nature of it. Harold replied with documentation, blockchain timestamps, geolocation, fingerprint verification, a side-by-side comparison of the breach against the clause they'd never read. Then silence. That's when the sharks smelled blood. A competitor I hadn't spoken to in 6 years invited me to lunch. A private equity firm asked very politely if the patents were encumbered. A startup offered a consulting role with 7 figures attached. No subtlety whatsoever. I let the calls go to voicemail. Every unanswered day widened the gap. Every delayed response cost our dentist leverage. Clients started asking questions. Auditors started reviewing logs. Someone inside the company finally asked the right one. "Do we actually own this technology?" Evan tried to hold the line. In a town hall, he dismissed the issue as exaggerated claims by a former employee. His voice cracked halfway through the word control. The Q&A session ended early. I watched it later from my kitchen, calm as still water. They thought this was a negotiation. They didn't understand yet. This was a countdown. This is where careful listeners lean in. Are you still with me? It landed in their inboxes at 9:01 on a Monday morning. That timing wasn't accidental. Monday mornings are when corporate confidence peaks after the first coffee. Before reality catches up, Harold believed in precision. So did I. The subject line was simple: notice of contractual breach and activation of intellectual property reversion clause. No adjectives, no threats, just fact. Attached was a clean, brutal package. The original contract, the digitally notarized clause. A breach analysis mapped line by line against the way Evan had terminated me publicly, without process, without HR, without notice. Then the list: 35 patents, each one numbered, each one valued, each one tied directly to active revenue streams. It read less like a letter and more like a guillotine. Evan replied 34 minutes later. He called me an at-will employee, claimed the clause was unenforceable, said our dentist would not be intimidated by false claims. He closed with, "This matter is resolved." I smiled when Harold forwarded it. He didn't reply directly, instead. He looped in our dentist's outside counsel, the kind of firm that charges 4 figures an hour and bills by the breath. That changed everything. 4 hours later, we received a call from Graham Holt, senior partner. His voice was clipped, tired, annoyed. "I've reviewed the materials," he said. "The clause appears enforceable." There was a pause. This was not disclosed during acquisition due diligence. "No," Harold said calmly. "It wasn't." After that, Evan went quiet, but the company didn't. Production paused on 3 lines tied directly to my systems. A Q4 shipment to Germany was delayed pending certification. Internal access to development environments was suddenly restricted while legal reviewed deployment logs. Slack messages leaked to me through old channels. Engineers panicking, managers asking questions no one could answer. One message stood out. "So, do we still own the tech?" That was when Evan tried damage control in the next all hands. He assured everyone our dentist retained full control of its intellectual property. His voice didn't carry the way it used to. Confidence requires belief. He no longer had it. The meeting ended early. Offers started arriving that same week. Not conversations. Offers, licensing inquiries, acquisition feelers. One email included a preliminary term sheet with 8 zeros on it and no greeting. Another promised board seats and future first refusal rights on anything I built next. I didn't accept anything. I didn't counter. I waited. Because leverage matures with time, by Friday. Our dentist legal team requested a mutual resolution session, not demanded, requested. The language had changed. Harold looked at me across the diner table we'd used for 15 years. "Same booth, same hash browns. They're bleeding," he said. "They just don't know how badly yet." I took a sip of coffee and nodded. Evan thought firing me would simplify things. All it did was make ownership very clear. By the following Monday, the silence from our dentists had turned desperate. They still hadn't called me directly. Evan, especially, stayed hidden. No emails, no messages, no carefully worded attempts to clear the air. But their lawyers were suddenly everywhere. Requests for meetings, requests for clarification, requests for time. Time was the one thing I wasn't giving. The offers multiplied. A West Coast manufacturing group wanted exclusive rights to 12 of the patents. A robotics firm proposed a full acquisition of the entire portfolio, plus a 5-year advisory role with an office overlooking the bay. A private equity firm skipped pleasantries entirely and sent a number so large it felt impersonal. Like a weather statistic. Every offer assumed the same thing: our dentist was no longer in control. Inside the company, the pressure was becoming visible. A sympathetic operations manager texted me late one night. "They're auditing everything tied to your systems. Legal locked half the servers. No one knows who's allowed to touch what anymore. That kind of confusion is expensive. Our dentist tried to project confidence. Another press statement went out about temporary operational adjustments. Investors weren't buying it. Analysts started asking questions on earnings calls that Evan wasn't prepared to answer. Can you clarify your exposure to inventor-held IP? Evan dodged, stumbled, redirected. The market noticed. By midweek, our dentist's general counsel finally called Harold directly. Her tone wasn't aggressive anymore. It was cautious, measured. We believe a collaborative resolution would be in everyone's best interest, she said. Harold put her on speaker. Then you should have collaborated before shredding the contract. He replied. They requested a formal sit-down, board present, conditions discussed, no commitments made. Harold looked at me afterward. Eyebrow raised. Your move. I didn't rush it. Instead, I let the rumors circulate. Let competitors know the patents were clean, unencumbered, ready to move. I didn't confirm anything. I didn't deny it either. By Friday, our dentist's CFO sent a message through an intermediary asking whether I'd be open to exploring a licensing framework. That phrase mattered. They weren't claiming ownership anymore. They were asking permission. Evan finally appeared at the edges of the conversation, then not to me, but around me, whispering to board members, pushing for delays, suggesting litigation. Their outside counsel shut that idea down quickly. Lawsuits freeze deals. Lawsuits attract regulators. Lawsuits turn private mistakes into public records. Evan had already humiliated me publicly. He didn't want to do it again to himself. Harold and I met at the diner one more time. The table was covered in folders now, offers stacked neatly, numbers circled, notes scribbled in the margins. You could walk away. Harold said, sell the portfolio, let our dentist collapse under its own weight. I considered it. Then I shook my head. No, I said. I want them to understand exactly what they lost. Harold smiled for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, our dentist formally requested a board-level meeting. Not a negotiation, a reckoning. I didn't wear a suit. If I was going to walk back into that boardroom, it would be as myself, not the version they'd tried to erase. Dark jeans, work boots, a simple button-down that still smelled faintly of Sold Air and coffee. The leather folio under my arm was the only thing that mattered. The receptionist froze when she saw me, not fear exactly recognition. The kind that comes too late. I nodded once and kept walking. No one stopped me. The boardroom looked unchanged. Same walnut table, same glass walls, same chairs filled with the same people who'd watched my contract disappear into a shredder weeks earlier. The only difference was the air. Heavier, tighter. Like the room knew what was coming. Evan was already there. His tie was looser than I remembered. Sleeves rolled up. Like someone who'd spent the morning pretending to fight fires, he started himself. He smiled when he saw me. Daisy, he said. Appreciate you coming in. Let's clear the air. I didn't sit. I placed the folio on the table and slid 2 documents forward. One was titled Patent Licensing Agreement. The other Statement of Intent to Transfer Intellectual Property Portfolio. 2 paths, I said calmly. You choose. The room went still. The CFO leaned forward first, eyes scanning the top page. We'd need time to review. You've had time. I interrupted, gently. You had time when Evan shredded my contract. You had time when legal received the breach notice. You had time every day you waited, hoping I'd blink. I looked directly at Evan. I don't blink. A board member cleared his throat. What are the terms? I tapped the licensing agreement. $7 million upfront. Annual licensing fee of 25% of net profits, derived from any product using the patents. 5-year term. Any missed payment or unauthorized transfer voids the agreement immediately. Evan scoffed. That's extortion. No. I replied. That's rent. Silence followed. Not tense, final. The legal director scanned the second document, face draining of color. If we don't agree to the license, then I accept one of the other offers. I said, some from your competitors, some from companies you once called vultures. That word landed hard. The CFO swallowed. You'd dismantle us. I shook my head. You dismantled yourselves. I just stopped holding the beams together. Evan stared at the papers, then at me, for a moment. I saw it, the realization, sharp and irreversible. He'd mistaken control for ownership, performance for power. This company was built on my work, I said quietly. You thought cutting me loose would reduce cost. Instead, it clarified value. No one argued. One of the quieter board members reached for the licensing agreement. We'll need a private discussion. I nodded and closed the folio. Of course. I walked out without looking back. Power doesn't demand attention. It waits. They kept me waiting 47 minutes. I know because I timed it. Not out of impatience, out of habit. Years of testing systems had trained me to measure silence the same way others measure noise. 47 minutes of raised voices behind frosted glass, of pacing, of panic disguised as debate. I imagined Evan arguing for delay, for litigation, for pride. I imagined outside counsel calmly dismantling every one of those ideas. Lawsuits invite discovery. Discovery invites regulators. Regulators invite consequences. Eventually, the door opened. They didn't invite me back inside. They sent a junior paralegal instead. Young, nervous, clutching a folder like it might explode. She avoided my eyes as she handed it over. Everything's been signed, she said quietly. Inside the folder was the licensing agreement, every page initialed, ink still fresh, no edits, no counteroffers. Attached to the final page was a wire confirmation slip, $7 million. Same-day transfer. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Not because of the number. Numbers lose meaning after a point. It was the silence underneath it, the absence of apology, of acknowledgement, of dignity. They didn't thank me. They complied. That was enough. Harold called as I stepped outside. Well, he asked. It's done, I said. He exhaled. About damn time. By sunset. The money was in my account. I checked it once, just to confirm the reality, then turned my phone off. No celebrations, no announcements, no victory laps. I drove north. The house wasn't furnished yet. Just clean lines and quiet space overlooking a lake that didn't care about quarterly earnings. I set a folding chair on the deck, poured a drink, and watched the light fade across the water for the first time in 15 years. There was no deadline waiting for me, no meeting I wasn't invited to, no work being quietly taken from me, no one mistaking my silence for weakness. Our dentist would keep operating for now. Every product roadmap would carry a hidden footnote. Licensed technology. Every earnings call would carry an unspoken truth. They weren't owners anymore. They were tenants. Evan kept his job. I heard that later, at least for the moment. I imagined him standing in that same boardroom, pretending nothing had changed, while every decision now required payment to the woman he'd tried to erase. I didn't need revenge. I was the reminder. The reminder that companies don't run on slogans. They run on people, on minds, on work that doesn't show up in glossy decks. And when you forget who built the engine, you shouldn't be surprised when the keys change hands. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling victorious. There was no surge of triumph, no urge to check the news or scroll through messages looking for Evan's name. What I felt instead was something quieter and far rarer. Relief. For 15 years. My life had been measured in deliverables, patent deadlines, emergency calls, systems that couldn't fail because too many people depended on them. I told myself that was purpose, that the wait meant I mattered. But purpose isn't the same thing as ownership. That realization came slowly, sitting on the deck with a mug of coffee, watching the lake move at its own pace. No alarms, no dashboards. No one waiting for me to fix what they refused to understand. Our dentist sent one final message a week later. A polite confirmation of the licensing schedule. No apology. No acknowledgement of how things ended. Just procedure. That was fine. They would pay on time. They would be careful. They would remember. I started receiving updates from firms that had once circled quietly. This time, I set the terms. Advisory roles with boundaries. projects chosen for curiosity, not urgency, for the first time in my career. I worked because I wanted to, not because someone else needed me to hold their structure upright. People asked if I missed it, the lab, the pressure, the feeling of being indispensable. I didn't, because indispensability is a trap. It convinces you that being needed is the same as being valued. It teaches you to accept silence as respect and erasure as evolution. Evan thought firing me would simplify his world. What it really did was simplify mine. I kept the folio, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Ownership isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself in boardrooms or slide decks. It lives in the details people skip. The clauses they don't read. The systems they assume will always be there. The company still stands. It always will, as long as they keep paying rent. As for me, I stopped being a piece of the machine. I became the one who decides how it's used, and that's the kind of freedom no contract can ever take away. When everything went quiet after it was over, I realized the real lesson wasn't about contracts, patents, or winning a corporate battle. It was about knowing your worth before someone else decides it for you. What stayed with me the most wasn't the money or the moment they signed. It was the calm afterward. That quiet morning when no one needed me urgently. No inbox on fire. No system about to fail. That's when I understood how long I'd been confusing exhaustion with purpose. If you're listening right now, I want to ask you something. Honestly, are you still with me to the end of this story? And where are you listening from today? Maybe you're working late. Maybe you're driving. Maybe you're sitting somewhere quiet, realizing parts of this story feel uncomfortably familiar. If they do, know this: being dependable should never mean being disposable. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone stops acknowledging it. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share where you're listening from, or what part hit closest to home. If you think someone else might need this reminder, consider sharing the video with them. And if you want to stay for more stories like this, real, human, and grounded, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes, the bravest thing we do isn't fighting back. It's finally choosing ourselves.